All right, hello, and welcome to my life. 9:30 at night, sitting here doing finance. I'm a student with Southeastern Louisiana University's Executive MBA program, and what we're going to be doing today is taking a little bit of a look at backtesting some financial strategies. Um, Today, as you can see on the screen, we're going to be looking at two things: one, earnings per share, and executive compensation. So, as many of you may be curious, as I am, uh, knowing that the chief executives at a lot of these Wall Street firms and companies are really making hand over fist cash incentives, stock options, etc., we want to know if they're warranted. Are they worth it? Well, my hypothesis, as a good capitalist, says that they're paid based on merit. What I expect to see here is that we have a positive correlation between earnings per share and that executive compensation. Earnings per share was chosen here because I think it's an accurate metric of what investors are willing to pay. The higher the earnings per share, the more profit that they're making, and obviously investors are willing to pay more for higher profits. The other thing I'll note here is the sample that I chose is the Dow Jones. I chose that because it's 30 companies, it's manageable to pull, and I think it is a good survey of the American economy as a whole. So a couple things I'll point out here as we take a look. Before we do any real analysis, what I've put together here is just a little color coding for you. So we have our stocks the same together in each side of the charts. We're taking a look at 5 years between 2011 and 2015. Within each stock, I put together a little bit of a reference so that you can see the either earnings per share relative to each other per year or the compensation relative to each year. So you see, just taking a quick look here at the chart, there's a little bit of significance that I see. I see a lot more red on the left-hand side. I see a lot more green on the right-hand side. So before doing any real analysis, my hypothesis does seem to have some merit and at least be worth taking further investigation into what we're looking at. So for the sake of time here, I went through and I did 5, but we're going to do 2015 together. So what we're going to be doing here is what's called a regression analysis. We're going to be, if you think about a line on a chart, we're going to be trying to understand if that line has a positive or a negative slope. We're also going to be seeing if it's significantly important or not. So using some tools that Excel makes pretty easy here, we're going to select regression. I'm going to come in here quickly. I'm going to select 2015 as my Y range. For my X range, I'm going to select 2015 on executive compensation. So we do that. We're going to throw that into a new workbook. Let's see, let's call this 2015. We're going to do a little bit of play here, make this thing look nice and pretty, because I know Dr. Cresson loves that. But one other thing that I selected as I did this was a graph. Some people like me are very visual, so it's helpful to see when it's lined out here. So what we have all together here is each of our 5 years, and we've done some analysis. So I'm going to take a moment here and let's take a look at some of the differences. So we'll pick, I guess, 2015 to start. A couple of things are of interest to me. One, that coefficient. So that coefficient is also understood as a slope. Okay, so first thing we notice, we have a positive coefficient. You notice that, in scientific notation here, we'd have to move this period here 8 times. So it is pretty small, but it is positive. The other thing I'm going to look at here is my t-stat or my p-value. Really you can use either one. They're both tied to the same thing. Generally speaking, if we have a p-value that's less than say 0.05, and I'm just throwing a rule of thumb out there, you're not really looking at significant numbers. Well, we do have a significant p-value here. So what this data is telling me is that these numbers are reliable, and we do have a trend here. So taking that into account here, I think this is very easy to see here, and I'm going to make this really big for everybody. Okay, so in yellow here you have your regression, and this is your coefficient. It may be a little bit easier to see here if we add a trend line. I'm just going to do a linear trend. I'm going to display that equation on here as well, so that everybody can see what we're looking at. All right, and as you see here, we do have a positive trend line. We are somewhere, scattered around here. So, even though we do have a positive significance, it is worth pointing out that, there is a bit of variance here. But what's most important here to take away is that, for the more that executive makes in 2015, the more the earnings per share. So that does confirm my hypothesis, but I would note that it's not overly by any kind of overabundant range. That coefficient really is pretty small. Now, for the sake of a comparison and analysis, let's take a look at the other years just to see if we're seeing the same results that we see in 2015. Since you folks listening are probably simple-minded, I'll make this easy and just go back year by year. So let's take a look at 2014. We see again our coefficient is positive, is very minimal. We do have a p-value of 0.5, so I do believe that these numbers do hold weight. Taking a look here at our chart here, you see while we do have I'm going to add that trend line. It's easier for me to see when we do that. Even though we do have that positive coefficient here, it is very, very minimal. Okay, so I would say again in 2014 that the executive that gets paid more does produce more. However, it is not by a great margin. Moving back to 2003, we see again we have a coefficient that's positive, very minimal. We see that we do have significance in these numbers, and again, boy, this just looks. Let me add that trend line here. This does look very skeptical that they're seeing any kind of results. So let me add my trend line here. Okay, I think it's giving me a little bit of fits. There we go. So we're going to add our linear in there, and this just again helps me view it. But I mean, you notice here that between $10 million here and $70 million, I mean, you're talking about maybe $1 on earnings per share. So at some point, I think we need to ask, is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? But for the sake of investment strategy, I think we can say that the more that that executive makes, the more they're going to produce. Let's again take a look at 2012. I'm going to move a little quicker here. We do have a positive coefficient, same story. Numbers are significant. You see again here, over the course of about 50,000, we're only going up, 50 million. I don't mean to talk about small potatoes here. We're only going up, about $1 in earnings per share. But the other point I think that needs to be recognized here is that in a lot of cases the volumes in the hundreds of millions of shares out there. So that is significant. Let's take a look at 2011. This should be interesting to you. What you notice here is a coefficient that is even lower than the rest of them, where the scientific notation was -8, on the rest is -10. You also see our p-value showing a lot of significance here. But boy, when you take a look at this this chart here, our regression is, I mean, depending on the angle on how many drinks you've had, almost looks negative. We do know that it's positive based on our coefficient, but negligibly so. So, what this is telling me that in some years, the executives may not be able to produce. And there's a lot of elements to this. I think with our sample size, it's a pretty valid sample to look at. But perhaps there was some more going on in 2011, than what meets the eye. But again, as we take a look at the 5-year trend here, I do believe that the hypothesis is correct. I think that the more that you pay an executive, the more that they will produce. And not by any crazy amount here, but we're talking margins, we're talking the volume that we see. I think it can be significant. So anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for your Dr. Cresson, and I hope this was helpful, and you can take away that the fat cats, some of them are smart, and those that are smart deserve a little bit more money. So with that, let me conclude.